What is up, Facebook land? I am super excited about today's episode. It was a kind of a last minute change, but it's one that I think, with the season that we're in, the season of hope and the season of birth and the season of forgiveness and love, that this is going to be an amazing episode. Before I introduce my very special guest, Brock Mueller, I want to dedicate the show, like I always do, in honor of Brock and in honor of the men and women who helped him take his first step for the second time. I want to dedicate this episode to the University of Michigan football program back when Rich Rodriguez was the head coach, and his strength staff who worked tirelessly with Brock. Most importantly, Mike Barwis, my business partner and one of my blood brothers. Dan Moses, Demo, who is running the Michigan Barwis methods, the man, the myth, the legend. Parker Whiteman, who I love more than anybody. We have the same barber, which I love. And he's now back with Barwis Methods after a stint at the University of Arizona football program. Jesse, Cassandra, everybody else that was affiliated with Michigan at that time that helped Brock. This show's for you. For those of you that are interested in listening to the podcast in its audio form, once again, you can hear it on iTunes, on Anchor, on Stitcher, on Breaker, on Spotify, on Pocket Cast, Castbox, Radio Public, Google Podcast, and Overcast. Before Brock starts talking, I want to give a little bit of a bio on him. He's an Ohio State grad. Us Penn State fans will not hold that against him, but I am wearing some Michigan colors tonight. In honor of the dedication tonight. He is an inspirational speaker, a man of God. He's somebody who loves his family, is dedicated to helping others and serving others and raising money for his charity, the First Step Foundation. And it's all because of a tragic event that occurred on Christmas Eve 2007 when his family was driving to church and an elderly man blew a stop sign and hit their car. And unfortunately, his father, David, was killed. And his brother, who was also in the car, his girlfriend, Hollis, was killed. And Brock was left paralyzed and given a 1% chance of ever walking again. And I don't know about you, but when you're given 1% of anything, that's almost like zero. And that feeling of hopelessness, I'm sure Brock will share with us in a little bit. In 2009, since his brother was an offensive lineman for the University of Michigan, he had an opportunity to meet with Coach Rodriguez and the staff, the strength staff, and they offered him an opportunity to come and train there. And that's where what I do at Max Out via Mike Barwis and what Mike has started and created and done over the last 9 years is because of Brock. Thousands of people have been impacted because of what he allowed Mike and his staff to do to him in order to try to create an opportunity for him to have a chance to walk. In 2010, a short year after being with Mike at Michigan, he led the University of Michigan Wolverines out onto the field for their opening day game. And it was, if you ever get a chance to go on to the event, I put a video in there from the Big Ten Network. And it was an amazing video they did. It's just awesome. I cry every time I watch it. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, an amazing person, somebody who I believe in with all my heart, Brock Mueller.
Thank you for having me on, Matt. I'm glad I could squeeze into the schedule.
I love it. It was a 2019 plan, and God said, nope, we're doing it now.
Yeah, and it couldn't be more appropriate with Christmas time coming, which always, in a way, is a hard time, obviously, for me. But I know a lot of people relate to that as a time that can be difficult for lost family members, but it's also a very joyous time. And obviously, the reason for the season reminds us of so many things in life, and that's why I always just make the most of it and definitely have a different perspective of Christmas time than a lot of other people may have.
And I can't imagine what the next week and a half is like for you normally. Since 2007, I know how close you were to your dad. I know the impact he had in your life. And I know how difficult losing someone you love tragically is, having lost my brother. a long time ago, and it still hurts today. So I can only imagine how hard this time is. But what I love about you is that you take, and I think I kind of do the same, is I take that hurt and that longing, that miss, and I turn it, the missing of them, and I turn it into something that powerful, that fuels me. Like I think when you hurt because you loved somebody so much and they're not there, that keeps them close to you. Like if that wasn't there, I don't know. I don't want to imagine not remembering my brother every day. Like I don't want to know what that feels like, because that, even though I get sad and I miss him, it means I'm still close. Does that make sense?
Right. And I would agree, you know, and with each passing year, I certainly just find more joy in remembering those stories and actually talking about it. Whereas early on, it was almost impossible to do. And as I got into speaking, I learned that actually would help me as much as it would help someone else with problems they had, or if they were just looking for motivation, inspiration, it would help me that much more to open up and share that, which is always difficult from the aspect that it leaves you vulnerable. Like this is something that's very intimate and very painful at times. But I think you're so right. And it's something I've prayed about a lot, that with my story and with all the pain and tragedy that went with it, that somehow God would use that for a greater purpose. And I think that's something that a prayer that a lot of people share. And I think that verse that I commonly quote from Romans, that God works all things for the good of those who love him. But when you're in that moment, even with, I have a great imagination, I always have as a kid. In that moment, I could never foresee anything that would be as good as what has been created. You know, if someone just said anything I wrote down, just write it down, it will happen. And there isn't anything that could be so closely tied to my story that would have turned out as well that I could have written than what has actually happened. And so now obviously I can look back in hindsight and say, wow, that plan was there. But for all of us at the beginning of that, it's not just there. It's not just an easy transition to make, to say, hey, don't worry, God's got it handled and it's fine. It seems like it was a daily procedure for me to believe that and hang on to it, to pray about it. And in the midst of that, constantly from the outside be told, that's not how this is going to happen. This is reality and this is the world and it's painful. You're going to suffer and this is what your life is now. Accept it. And so it was a constant battle to say, like, no, there's going to be good from this. And there's also, I think, a little intentionality in terms of that pain that you feel, to say, I'm going to focus this and I'm going to direct this energy, even though it's negative energy, I'm going to direct it towards a purpose that is valuable to me, towards a purpose that's going to honor that person's memory, and it's going to just, you know, keep that alive, rather than the feeling we get, which is I want to forget this. I don't want to feel it ever again, because I wouldn't wish it upon anybody. But and it's a tough thing to do, but it's, you know, more than worth it.
Let me ask you this. So you're on your way to church. You had the accident. What do you remember from the actual accident itself until the time you were at the hospital? Do you have memory of that time period, or were you unconscious and woke up in the hospital? How did that?
I'm still to this day not sure of any timelines. Of course, I have my own recollection of how much time may or may not have passed. I remember the accident happening, and then instantly just blacked out. I remember coming to, which in my mind was maybe 10 or 15 minutes before I ever made contact with anyone, which was a first responder. And so I don't know if I made contact with that first responder on the car 30 minutes after the accident or an hour. I mean, I assume it would have been 20 or 30 minutes, but I remember that portion and still being somewhat in shock, you know, as he said, which I thought maybe I had been in shock. I had never been even close to in shock as I was. I was pretty calm, but to me, that's being in shock, because it's not a time to be calm with what was happening. I still didn't realize what had happened, honestly. And part of me really just kind of felt, wow, I must have drifted to sleep, and now I'm just in this nightmare right now, but I'll wake up soon. And all that kind of went out the window once they used the jaws of life to take the roof off, and just told me, when we pull you from this car, it's going to be excruciating. And I was confused because I started to I couldn't feel my legs. I kind of felt like maybe the circulation was cut off and they fell asleep. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I mean, and I couldn't move them to lift myself either, but I still, in shock, didn't think it was a huge deal, I guess, at that time. But then it confused me. He said it's going to be excruciating. And I was like, okay. And they pulled me from the car, and it was the most painful experience I'd ever had in my life. I mean, nothing even close to even comparing it to. And of course, was in constant pain from that moment on. Transported to our local hospital. And I do have glimpses, and it's odd because some of it's a blur and I forget, but there's other parts that are just crystal clear that I can relive in a moment, but I never want to, but sometimes I unfortunately do. But I remember a state trooper that informed me that my dad had passed away. And again, I was completely distraught. My older brother Blake was with me, and I remember him being the same way, that all we could do is cry. But still, there was a part of me that just wasn't quite. It was kind of, okay, this is getting a little too real. I could wake up anytime now. That'd be great. And they moved me from there to Toledo Hospital, St. Vincent's in Toledo, and I went into an 8.5 hour surgery. And by that time, I was still kind of calm again. They're just like, hey, you're going into surgery. I didn't know for what or anything. And that was the first time I had been put under in that way. And then woke up in what seemed like a couple seconds, but it was 8.5 hours. And that's where the surgeon had told me that I would never walk again. She said even a 1% chance would be giving me all the hope in the world and all the credit in the world, that a 1% chance would be the best I could possibly hope for to regain any of the things I had lost.
Now, so you get that 1%, right? And I know how I would have handled it, and it probably would not have been nearly as well as you did. Were you angry? Were you feeling hopeless? Were you feeling sad? Were you feeling, you know what, screw you, I'm going to go and prove you wrong? Like, take me from the time when you first heard those words to the point where you finally said, I am not going to allow 1% to be the defining number of the percentage that I'm going to have to walk, that I'm going to flip the script and give myself a 1% chance that I will walk.
Yeah, I think the best word really was just despair for the situation. Of course, part of me, again, didn't fully comprehend, I think, the full gravity of the situation. I just kind of was like, couldn't keep up with everything. And hearing that was just despair of, and that's the thing. That seemed like obviously a big problem, but not compared to learning the passing of my father and learning about the passing of Hollis in that accident, that loss of life that isn't going to be changed. And hearing this was just another thing. And it was despair. There was hopelessness in that. And really, I think from that point, more of a numbness that I almost felt like I was drained, didn't really have any emotion left to give out, even if I wanted to. Eventually, I think it was more bitterness that I can't, why did this doctor tell me? I mean, she just looked at my spinal cord, did the surgery, has done thousands of surgeries, has all this experience, but why would she look at that and then tell me like I'll never walk again? And then say, well, it's 1% chance. And that's again too, I was obviously just coming out of surgery. So that's one of the things I feel like I remember really, really well, but I don't know for certain. But I believe she talked about, even if you had all the financial impact in the world and all the best doctor, I mean, 1% chance just highballing it. And while there was bitterness with that, that certainly evolved with my story and with the understanding. And I think it also evolved with her as well, to see not only my faith, but the support system I had, and just in realizing the kind of person I was, because I think that's what we always want to try to get across to people, is that I'm not defined by this career that I'm doing right now. I'm not defined by the amount of money I'm making. I'm not defined by all these different things. And even with this injury, like, I didn't want to be defined by this injury where the doctor said, and they obviously, in a professional manner, that's just how they have to be. You know, they can't just be human and say, hey, maybe you will walk. Who knows? I mean, they're not going to give you that false hope that people use, or that term they use is false hope. They're not going to open themselves up to that. But it did evolve over time. When I was at the Michigan hospital, say, this is way harder than I could have ever imagined, doing physical therapy, having medical complications. Of course, I'd never been through anything like that. And so it was much harder than I thought. But at the same time, I started to say, every day, relying more on my faith and saying, like, I'm not going to let this beat me. And I feel like I'm supposed to walk again. So I'm going to continue to pursue that goal and that mission for as long as I can. And it also evolved the way I looked at the 1%, because it is, like you said in your introduction, something that's, you might as well just say you're never going to walk again, rather than say, well, 1% chance maybe. Like, it's pretty much the same in our minds. But it started to evolve to say, well, hey, that's enough. 1 out of 100 people or whatever. And I'm sure she could have said 0.01 or 3 or whatever number, but for me, it was 1. And it was like, that's what hope is, just anything, and so I've never really bought into the false hope narrative, so to speak, just from the aspect of, to me, hope is hope, whether it's, a lot of hope or little hope, or it's all hope. And so it evolved. And of course, Mike Barwis, I met him at the hospital, and that really invigorated that spirit in me that I was supposed to walk again, and made me really think about it.
Well, let me ask you this. So I mean, obviously we'll talk about Mike in a second, and not everybody knows the personality and the energy of Mike Barwis, but I know how I handled death. I know how I handled the shock of tragedy that you weren't prepared for. And I highly don't recommend that way. My faith was broken during that time in my life. And how did you, if you, and I think I know enough about your story, and we've talked enough over the years, that for whatever reason, you stayed steadfast to your faith, and you stayed true to your faith. And I lost my way, and I lost my faith, and I lost my belief that God was merciful, and that God was good, and that God was my God. And I lost that. And how did you maintain through 2 deaths that were important, of people that were important to you, through the loss of the lower half of your body, through the knowledge that you're going to have to walk through the pits of hell, literally in your mind, and through physical therapy, to get to the point where you could even potentially take a single step? How did you maintain that strength, that conviction, that hope, that faith, that trust?
Well, it's kind of a blessing and kind of a curse to connect with so many people that have been through tragedy. They've been through struggles. I read your book and how you dealt with that loss. But all of those things together, we're all different individuals, different personalities. And I kind of used a lot of these stories that I've come across to help, push me forward in the belief that I can get to that better place. And one thing I knew, again, having a great support system, but the one thing I really deep down believed is that, to me, if I lost the faith aspect, it would be the equivalent of throwing in the towel, because I, put a lot of thought into the doctor, her experience, and all the things she knows, and saying, this is how it's going to be. And I also knew if it was just up to me, I was drained every day. If you look at physical therapy, you look at the complications that happened, the emotional drain. One of the hardest moments was watching my father's funeral from a live feed in my hospital room, not being able to be, and that really, like, this is really happening moment. Also, when I got home, this is really happening moment. But just drained from all those. It's like, I'm not going to have enough to get where I need to go. And my mom's not going to be able to give me enough to keep me going there. And it always went back to the faith, and that I had to literally rely on God every day. And there certainly were moments where that was shaken, where I was angry. And that was my prayer is, why is this happening? I mean, it would be so easy to just fix it or prevent it, and why? But I did. I was really blessed. I don't credit myself with just being strong enough, because I wasn't. There were just so many times I wasn't strong enough to get through the day, but I was carried through it. I think a lot of times, and I've been blessed with, even today, people that said, I remember hearing about your accident and I said so many prayers for you. And you think, well, did that matter? And to me, it absolutely mattered, because I know how many moments I could not go any further, and yet I did. And people say, how did you do that? And I think for a second, and then it all comes back to me to say, I was blessed with prayers. I was blessed by people that came into my life. I think they were placed there time and time again. And that's what kept me steadfast. And I think it gets so easy in our lives with stress and pain and suffering and all these things that are put upon us. Sometimes of our own doing, but a lot of times not. Things we don't have control. We don't have control over other people. We don't have control over specific events that may happen. And as much as we want to control those, there's nothing we can do to control all aspects. And so we start to focus on those things and say, well, in my case, someone ran a stop sign. That's not my fault. Like, why am I dealing with these problems? Well, and there were definitely times I did focus on that. Like, I should not be dealing with this. I was just about to graduate college and had all these plans, and now they're stopped, and it wasn't my fault. And yet I deal with the ramifications of that action. And so when that happens, I think we really can lose our way, so to speak. And I think it just was so fortunate for me that I stayed focused on my goal. A big part of that was the coaching staff, among other people, saying, listen, don't worry about the financial aspect. I had been saving up to get through school and do all these other things. And, my mission and not being able to work for quite a long time, that wiped that all out. But again, that support system, don't worry about that. We're going to do some fundraising. We're going to help you. And all along the way, those things would happen. It would have been so easy to pass those over and say, this doesn't make up for what happened. And I just never had that attitude. I always had the attitude that this is my life. I have to be the one to deal with it. No one's going to deal with it for me. And if I let other people deal with it, even something as simple, and I had so many people wanted to help, including my mom. She wanted to push me in the wheelchair because she could tell how much I struggled. And she knew I struggled enough. But, I always insisted I was going to push my own wheelchair, because eventually I got to the point where I could do it myself and it wasn't a struggle for me. And I knew if I had let her, then I would have had struggles somewhere down the road. And so it was all about having a balance of being able to be humble enough to accept help and assistance, but on the other hand, being able to be strong enough to know when I didn't, or I shouldn't have help or assistance, because I had to do it myself. But the main part of that was taking ownership of my life and saying, and that took a lot of time. I did go back and graduate college and finish my undergrad, but it took time to get that stuff back. It wasn't just, hey, I'm going to just carry the load and I'm the man and I'm going to do it all. It wasn't that. And I think people get discouraged because they look at an athlete or anyone that they admire, a singer or anybody like that, or even a coach, like a teacher, and they think, boy, they have it all together. It's easy for them. They're smart, whatever it is. And you begin, as you get older, I think you start to realize, like, no, they may have been talented. They may have had help along the way and this and that, but it really, to me, all comes back to hard work. And like I said, taking ownership and taking responsibility for those things. And that's what you see that other people do. And that's really what I try to emulate is, no, they just get up and they get after it. And you might have a down day, but the next day is another day to get back and say, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to say, well, I screwed up yesterday, or I was, just didn't have a good attitude yesterday, so I might as well not even try anymore. It's every single day making that commitment and sticking to it and persevering.
So I think we first met, I was at Michigan installing the tower, the max out tower. And you were out on the turf field, out on the main training turf field, and Parker was with you, and you had plyo boxes along the side, and you had 3 on each side, the big square boxes. Those, and I love Parker and you had this thing, like you guys had a connection where I could just tell he was willing you forward, and you trusted him implicitly. And I'm watching this on the side. I was taking a break from installing. I'd heard about you, and Mike had talked highly about you, and I'm like, all right, let me go check out this Brock kid and see what he's got going on. And I saw you out there, and you took it took a few times, but you took your first 6 unbraced steps, where you didn't have your canes, and you were able to go from past all 3 boxes until the end. And that joy that I saw in your face, and that joy that I saw in Parker's face, because it's as much as and as hard as it was for you to go every day and drive, what was it, 3 hours each way or 2 hours each way to the University of Michigan?
Yeah, it was usually 2 hours each way, but I did start when I was in school in Columbus, and then it was like 3.5, and I'd do that twice a week. So yeah, it was a lot of driving.
So when I saw you there, and I saw that, I know how invested Mike was, how invested Parker was, and Dan was in your success and being part of something, because they could see that when you can see just a little bit of things getting better, like you see something fire off just a little bit, that's like God sending you a little signal saying, keep going, keep going, keep going. And I watched that joy on you taking those 6 steps, that I just knew I wanted to be a part of whatever Mike's doing, whatever Parker's doing, whatever you're doing. Like, that was my commitment right then. That was sold. God showed me something that day, that a person who was told they'd never walk again, their spinal cord was so severely damaged that they could never get a signal to the lower half of their body. And somehow Mike Barwis figured out a way to do it. Yep. And to get your muscles to get a signal, and to have them fire off, and to increase that load, and increase the volume of the signal, and then increase the functionality of the extremities, and all those things that Mike was able to do for you. That's God.
Yeah.
As much as Mike is science and Wolff's law, and got to send the cross filaments and the microfibers, got to you get the whole Mike Barwis component thing, right? But that's God. That's God taking one of his people and saying, I'm going to bless you with a gift to be able to understand how the human body works, and how the brain and the body are symbiotic, and you're going to figure out how to fix things that were once deemed unfixable. Mm-hmm. Tell me about the day that Mike came into your hospital room, and what that did inside of you, as far as affirming your faith and your belief that you're going to walk again.
I remember it because I had a broken right arm in the accident, and one of the only things I could work out at that time was my left arm. And so I remember doing these left arm workouts, and as much as I did every day, there were a lot of times I was pale, sick looking, and they said, doesn't look like you're ready to go. Maybe you should just stay in your room. And I'm like, no, like, I don't want to lay in a hospital bed and stare at the ceiling anymore. and I would always make my workout, but it wasn't because I was just like gung-ho excited. Hey, let's go down to the physical therapy room and feel lots of pain and torture. It was because I just knew I had to do something different than lay in that bed, because otherwise that's right where I would stay. But I was working out my left arm, and again, easily could have said, I shouldn't have to be here. There were many people there that shouldn't have to be in the hospital, that didn't want to be there. You could almost feel that negative energy, but I always just tried to be positive, and I just tried to work out the left arm. I could have easily overlooked Mike and said, hey, yeah, thanks for stopping. Sure, great, whatever. But because I was just open to God giving me some kind of path and purpose, and I had prayed about it, when I met Mike, I didn't just pass it by, just like I don't with anybody that would come to visit me, is, hey, is this a person I'm supposed to connect with? And Mike was very obvious, one with the voice, which was a good impression.
I've worked on it over the years.
Yeah, it's really catches your ear, and people tend to listen very closely when they hear that voice. And I do remember him telling me, like, everybody said hello. There were about 6 coaches there, and not even Elliott's coaches. I do remember his offensive line coach being there. I remember Tony Dews, who's a wide receiver coach. I remember the other Tony Gibson that was the offensive coach. And they didn't need to be there to. Elliott had already verbally committed, but they wanted to be there. Mike, after we said hello, Mike just said, he's like, so when do you want to come work out with the team and walk? And I kind of perked up, like, well, gosh, I want to do that right now. And in the back of my mind, I'm kind of like, I don't know if I could though, because they're fast, they're strong, they're all these things, and I'm not, like, so I don't know. And the physical therapist, I remember her pulling him aside, hey, and it was so funny because the way I remember it was like a parent or a teacher talking, and you're a kid standing there, and it's like, I can hear every word you're saying. Like, I don't know, but she said, he's not going to walk again. Like, he has a spinal cord in, like, he's paralyzed. Like, his spinal cord is damaged, and that doesn't heal like other nerves. I don't know how much you understand, which, of course, she didn't know Mike went to medical school.
You don't ever say that to Mike Barwis.
Right. It's like, I don't know if you get the human body at all. The strength and conditioning coach went to medical school at Temple. It's like, and I remember him kind of nodding, like, okay, and I was kind of disappointed, like, oh man, she shut him right down. Like, I'm kind of ready to bite, like, all right, like, let's get excited and do something just out of this world amazing. Well, he just turned right back to me. He's like, so when were you saying you wanted to come work out with the team again? Because we'll get you back up walking. Like, didn't shy away from it at all. And so I knew, of course, I had no idea how vested in my life Mike would be, or how critical that moment was to the rest of my future and my life. But there was just an inkling of it, like, could this be something really special? Like, kind of a we'll see. And he said, come work out when you're ready. And of course, I spent almost 2 years doing physical therapy where I didn't feel like there was much I could do outside of my current schedule, which was resting at home, going to physical therapy for a couple hours, 3 or 4 days a week, and just trying to take care of myself, trying to manage my life again and kind of, become independent, get dressed in the morning, all those things. But Mike never let me forget it. And I think that was a big difference in my life is, again, I didn't want help. I didn't want to be a burden. And Mike was like, you'll be doing us a favor to come in and work out with us. And he never shied away from that.
I lost my audio here real quick, Brock, so just keep talking until as long as your mouth's moving, we're good, buddy.
All right.
Keep going.
I just realized that Mike wanted to, he wanted me to work out with them. It was almost like he was recruiting me. Like I was this 5-star recruit. And that's what convinced me that I needed to get together with him and just try this and do something incredible. And I finally asked him, how does that even look? And I think there's so many times in our lives that we say no for people. We look at an opportunity and we're not sure if we can accomplish it, or we're not sure if they want to help us. And we just say, well, I'm not even going to ask. So you almost say no for that person. And I finally asked Mike, and he said, I don't care what it looks like or how much time, whatever it is, we're just going to jump into it, both feet and everything. And he said, he just needed commitment, because he said it wasn't going to be like anywhere else where you get a 30-day free trial, money back guarantee or anything. It was just, we're just going to absolutely go in, work out. You're going to do everything I say, no questions asked. And after a month, 2 months, 3 months, or a year, you're never going to get to a point that you're going to say, Mike, it's too hard and I don't want to do it anymore, because we are committed to getting you to walk. And I'd never done anything like that, but I knew I had to make a choice. If I knew I was supposed to walk again or not, I had to commit to Mike right here, right now, and do it. And I ultimately did. And the thing that really keyed in with me was that Mike told me that he would rely on God for the things we couldn't control, but we were going to do everything within our power to show God that we were faithful and that we were going to just trust in him. So from that point, obviously we did the really tough workouts every single day. Mike showed me how committed he was to having me be successful. I think Parker, Demo, all those guys, they wanted to be a part of something truly special. But I think to do that with my tragedy, you really had to have something terribly tragic, happen in that. And even looking at something painful as becoming paralyzed.
Keep on talking, buddy. Still trying to figure out how to get my headphones to work again, because I can't hear crap. So just keep on going, pal.
So I kind of wore that as a badge of honor to say, these guys aren't looking at my life as a burden. They aren't looking at my life as something to pity. They're looking at it as a challenge. They're looking at it as an opportunity to really do God's work and being a part of a miracle. And as you said, when we first met and I was taking those steps, every day there was a miracle, whether it was a muscle twitch or a step or a feeling or even a connection, that was made. There was a miracle almost every day in there. And I got to feel things and experience things that most people don't get to experience in their entire lifetime. And, for that, I'm grateful. Some of those things weren't real pleasant in the workouts, but I also discovered something about myself that I otherwise never would have discovered. And the big part of that was in realizing how strong I was internally. And, I was around all these athletes that were so physically strong and fast and all those things, but they reminded me nearly every day that they wished they had the willpower and the strength that I showed in my workouts, the perseverance I had in my workouts. They wished they had that. But I think a part of them knew they couldn't without, going through the experiences I had gone through and being up against a rock and a hard place of, this is what I have to do. But I think they were able to get a taste of it. I really think they were able to get just a piece of it. And that's kind of why I started speaking, sharing the story, and having the hope that somebody else could benefit from hearing about my struggle, hearing about the things that I went through. But I stayed, of course, connected to Mike through all of this, and to this day, he's given me so much more than I thought a person could give another person. I had just met Mike in the midst of my struggle, and I think there's so many times in life, of course, we have people that exit our lives because it's too hard and you're in a struggle. But in Mike's case, he jumped in right into the fire, right into the pan with me to go through what I was going through at the most difficult part of my life. And it's still amazing to me as I grow older that I realize there's people that may even exit our lives when times are pretty good. And I don't know, to have Mike selflessly put himself out there with me and join me in in this journey is pretty remarkable. And again, that's a total God thing for him to have done that. But another thing I was going to add too during the workouts, one of my favorite stories I share about Mike that I think a lot of people relate to is I remember how tough he was on players. He obviously was tough on me, but he was tough on players. You know, he's a disciplinarian, made sure they were on time, made sure they did every single rep perfectly, just like he did with me. But I remember one day I was really hurting, and he wanted to make sure I'd come back because he knew how long the drive was, and that I would have a really hard time convincing myself that, hey, go back up there and do it again, you know. And I remember him half threatening me because he said, you know, he's like, you're gonna be back tomorrow, and I'm like, well, yeah, of course, it's another weekday. Of course, I'll be back. And he said, you know what happens if you're not back, right? And I was confused because I was like, well, like, you can't kick me out of school, you know, like, you know, what are you going to do? And
so I can't hear anything. So we'll just lead with this, but I want to ask another question. So
yeah,
I don't want to leave you hanging, speaking for the next 30 minutes without me interjecting. Not sure what happened to my audio, but I just can't hear anything. So not sure what you just talked about, but you looked great talking about it for the record. And I love how you got Barwis methods. All right. Yeah. So let's talk about the First Step Foundation.
Yes.
Let's talk about why that's so important to you. I know Mike had given a TED talk back in probably 3 or 4 years ago, and at the University of Michigan, and might have been longer than that. And that was one of the most inspirational 12 minutes I've ever spent my life watching. And he has an amazing quote there. And I put it on my Facebook feed. Basically, it says, you don't know, you have to pay attention to the catalyst in life. You don't know where that catalyst is going to come from. It might be a stranger, it might be somebody you've known your whole life. It may come from a victory, it may come from a defeat, or it may come from helping someone take their first step for the second time. And for me, that I get chills every time I hear that, because when you think about that, you know, when you're learning how to walk as a baby and you're a parent, and I know, Brock, you don't have kids yet, but when you have a kid take their first step, that is one of the coolest, most remarkable and memorable things that you're ever going to witness. And you just assume that that's the first step of the many steps they're going to take for the rest of their life through life. And you don't think that when you have that there may be an opportunity when you can't walk for some reason.
Right.
And then you have to fight yourself back to taking that first step like you did when you're 9 or 10 months old. And I think when I saw Parker's face and your face that day, it was almost like a Parker seeing his kid take his first step for the first time in his life.
Yeah.
And Parker doesn't have kids yet, but it's one of those things where I think that's what I saw. And that's one of the most remarkable things to witness, someone take their first step for the second time. And I know that became the impetus for the First Step Foundation. Talk to us about that. And when you're done talking, since I can't hear anything, give me like a thumbs up. And then I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to wrap this thing up, since I would love to hear how this interview goes after it's over, because apparently you're brilliant, and I'm dealing with audio technical difficulties. So let us know more about the First Step Foundation and how that came about. I remember we had a phone conversation, you and I, in the very beginning when we were trying to figure out what this charity was going to look like.
Yeah.
But take us to the point now from where it started to and where it is now, and all the things that it's doing.
Well, so I'll finish my previous thought. Was that Mike asked me if I was going to come back to the next workout, and I said, of course. And he's like, well, you know what happens if you don't? I didn't know what it was, but it was funny because he's like, you don't want to find out, and I never did find out because I always showed up. But one of the things that I realized that if I didn't show up those days, when I really think about it, the first step may not exist if I didn't show up. If I gave up on my mission to walk again, which was selfish in and of itself for me to get something back for me, kind of thing. But the purpose grew out of that And with the First Step Foundation, we obviously talked a lot about how to form it and what it would be. But Mike had so many people through my story and through word of mouth that came to him because they wanted that same opportunity I had. I mean, I was able to work out with the best equipment, the best people, around professional athletes every day. That made me finally convince myself that I had to perform at their level, and it was powerful. And I think that was a big part of why I was able to be successful. And I truly believe God put me there for a bigger purpose than just walking again. And I've had that purpose revealed more and more as I've grown and the years have passed. But now the First Step Foundation, because Mike helped hundreds of people before he ever got a dollar or a dime or anything, and he still doesn't take a dollar. Condition that are injured and they want to regain movement, they want to regain feeling, whatever it is. So now what the foundation does is it takes Mike's brain, and we've had other people that have shadowed him that have learned what he does since he's so busy, and now it opens up his gym, the gym that the professional athletes use, to people like me that have been injured, whether they have spinal cord injury, stroke, cerebral palsy, MS, Parkinson's, any type of neurological condition. And he has done that to help people, like you said, I mean, live a miracle. We've had many quadriplegics that have regained so much more than what I've gained as far as walking again. I mean, the ability to be independent. And that has just been one of my proudest moments, to be able to be a part of that and to help people regain their lives. And the things that I found is it's empowered them. It's not just about getting them to walk and move again. It's about them believing in themselves and believing they have purpose, and life can still be a wonderful thing. And that's what's great. And like you said, seeing a kid take his first step is powerful. But when you have someone that understands what they've lost, kid doesn't know any different. And it's beautiful and it's wonderful for them to experience it. But when you take someone that has it taken away and they understand what the loss of that means to their life, that is, I don't know, it's just miraculous. And it's, as tragic as the loss is, it on the flip side is just beautiful and joyous. And I mentioned, well, as I was talking to you before we started about my walk, we had the charity. It was a 1 mile fun run, walk, roll. We had a bunch of our first step clients. We call them first steppers that push themselves in their wheelchairs. Some of them quadriplegics that couldn't push themselves in their wheelchair, and now they can, that pushed that mile. I went down there in September and just said I was just going to walk a mile. And I certainly trained for it, but I did not train for the walking aspect, just being in good shape, I guess. But I walked that mile. It took me about an hour and 20 minutes. I fell probably well over a dozen times, got back up, just kept stepping over an hour, got the mile walk in. But the cool thing was I knew I could do that. I know I can do even more. I plan to go back and see Mike again, but what was cool about that was I got to see some of the people that are training with some assistance. They walked a lot better than when you saw me walking with braces and canes, but they had a little assistance from the trainers, and they took 5-6 steps. We finished on home plate in Port St. Lucie at the Mets AAA minor league club, but they got to take those 4 or 5 steps, cross home plate, and cross that line. And that was awesome because I get to see them taking those first few steps, and was able to just share what I've been given, which is a miracle for me to walk a mile and say, one day you could do this. Not a lot of people are going to look at my condition after walking that mile and say, I want to feel that way. But they do want that accomplishment and that feeling of the result. I think that's why people run marathons or Tough Mudders or Spartan races or Ironmans, to go after that goal. And it is awesome to be able to share that with everyone that was there, but especially the first steppers that are taking those first few steps and say, I was right there. Now I'm here. you can get there. It's all within you. And as you said, being a catalyst, just a small piece of their.
So his dad was Jason's 5th grade teacher, and that's how the connection with Matt and Mike Barwis happened. And watching where he's at now, when he was told never, there's no shot. I sat, and this isn't a slight on the rehab, his acute rehab that he had after the hospital, but I met with them probably about 3-4 years ago, and I won't say the name of, because I don't want to be disparaging, but I met with his outpatient rehab, who told me that it's impossible that he's taking steps. And I said, "What do you mean impossible?" They said, "Well, he's a whatever his level of injury is, complete T, whatever." And I said, I don't know what anything you just said means, but I can tell you that I have physically watched him take steps under his own power with his legs.
Right.
Not a mechanical device, him telling his brain, telling his leg to move, and it moves. I said, so I don't know what you're talking about, but I can tell you it works. And I think the thing that I am so motivated about with, Jason and I started Max Out almost 10 years ago. And Mike's been a part of that since the beginning. And, we wouldn't be who we are today without Mike Barwis. And we like to think that a lot of what we brought to Barwis Methods, as far as bringing towers to the facilities and giving it a place to be utilized, not just for the athletes, but for people that need rehab, has helped on some level. But the thing that motivates Jason and I is that we know that Mike has the solution. Now it's just a matter of getting as many people to get as much knowledge in their brain from Mike so that they can go out and teach others and help others. And I think that's where, when I get excited, it's knowing that there is, if we could just, Mike says in that speech that if we go through a list of protocols, and if those protocols don't work on you, then you're broken, not the protocols.
That's it.
Guess what? It's the protocols that need to be changed, not the person. We need to figure out for you what you need to have done to help you, not go through the step 1 through 10. And if you're not better, then oh well. And I think what I've seen through you, and I've seen through Matt Helm, I've seen through Ashley, and I've seen through everyone else, Chris, and everybody else that's been up there that has been affected, whether it's from a TBI or stroke or whatever their neurological and neuromuscular issue is, they've all gotten better.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the guy's name. There's a doctor that had a brain injury that was doing like on the wobble board. Like he's now, like he was all jacked up, and now he's.
We only remember him as Doc.
Doc, yeah.
Bradley,
that's what we knew him as.
Brian Bradley, but Doc we call it. Yeah.
Watching where he was to where he got to was ridiculous. And to me,
he was a doctor, and he went to Mike and had an outstanding recovery. And I think that's one of the things that I really. I do believe the fact that the 5 closest people we become, parts of them. We absorb what they are. And Mike, for me, in reality, I mean, if you look at the last 10 years, I don't think there is a person anywhere that I have been closer to. And part of that was forced because I got dropped off at his gym and I couldn't escape. But one of the big things I've taken from Mike is that he loves to give from himself that he thinks are his gifts and give it to someone else and allow them to take that on and expand on it and do better. And that's the thing I love, is that he never takes credit, but he takes pride in the things that they accomplish. And I think I've done that as well, in seeing the progress that Ashley's made and seeing the progress that Matt, and even Matt and Lindsay as a couple, to see the things that they're doing now, because they're not just, oh, hey, let's help Matt. Like, they're helping other people, and they open their own gym. And to see the progress of, and that's the thing. I mean, the list really, I think off the top of my head, I could easily do 2-3 dozen people, but to see Doc's progress and see the other people that have progressed. We always make the joke that I was a guinea pig, and I was, in a way. I mean, and a lot of the time it was Parker and Demo, because they couldn't figure it out. They would throw things together and they wouldn't work, but we'd move on to the next thing. And we'd find what worked. And of course, Mike had a lot of those, but Parker Dan Moses would throw something else, and Mike might say, that might get something, and it would click. And you don't know how much it advanced me, but it advanced me that little bit. And we would come up with those ideas, and he loved to see Parker and Dan, come into their own and do, some things better than he did. And so I've taken that too, because I take so much pride in seeing other people's progress. And while I feel like I blazed this trail and went through some really brutal trials, the process has gotten so much easier, and it makes me feel so good and happy for everyone else that has gone this path, because it's a little bit easier. But that's the thing, I've also realized that it's still not easy. It might be a little bit easy. I might have helped them, been a catalyst that much to help them get there. But the other thing I've realized, and that's a story I told earlier that you may not have heard, but Mike said, like, what happens if you don't show up? And I'm like, I don't know. And he's like, you don't want to find out. And I do. I really believe that if I didn't show up, if I said, Mike, you're crazy, this is too hard. I mean, I did say that, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't get away, like I said. But and I thought it in my mind all the time, like, this is too much. But Mike always gave me what I needed, just like God would. He would have me think about the future. He would talk to me about, you have no idea the impact you're going to have in doing this. So don't think about, okay, I'm going to just be able to walk again. Think about, you are going to have an impact beyond anything you can imagine. And that's what God was telling me too. But Mike, he has a really strong faith, and he really was a visionary for that, because I could not see it for the life of me then with everything I was dealing with. But if I don't show up, I don't know that the first step starts. I don't know if Mike, I really do think he would have continued on, because he has a mission to help people. And I think he would have done, but I don't know. I don't know if the first step would have, the foundation would have been created. I don't know if that's the thing. People wouldn't have heard about my story. Maybe Matt through Mike, maybe Matt Helm doesn't get connected. That connection doesn't get made. And it scares me to death. And that's the thing. Mike was trying to scare me to think I was going to have to do extra. And I said, well, I'm already doing 110% that people talk about. 110. I actually was. So I can't do the extra, because I was done when Mike said you can't give anymore. I said I was done 5 or 6 times before that, but Mike said you're not done until I say so. And so that's what really I look back on, and what I try to get across to people. What happens if you don't show up? It's not, you lose your job or you get kicked off a team or any of that. It's, you can miss out on so much opportunity. It's unbelievable. And I look back on my life, and I could never have enough time to talk about all the opportunities I've had, because I showed up every day. And there were a lot of days most days I showed up that I did not feel like it, that I was hurting, I was sick. I think a lot more so than other people that might feel like they can't do it. And it really is, Mike was my accountability guy, and I believed every word he said. And he said, if you don't show up one day and you don't answer your phone, I will drive the 2 hours. I will go to your house and find you wherever you are, and I will drag you up here. And so I never wanted to get to that point. But that's the thing I think people miss out on, is they look at the direct effect and not the indirect effects that their decisions have. And so I just hung on to that and said, Mike, show up every day. And now I get to look back on that and say, wow, I'm so glad I showed up every day, because I told myself, and I still believe this, I don't know that everything I went through as far as Mike's workouts were worth it to be able to take steps and get that independence part. But when I look at the after effects for what it does for everyone else, that is way beyond. I would go through it all again 10 times over if it would help, one more person have an easier life and be able to make progress. Like, I would do it, all over again. And that's powerful. That really is what, keeps me driven in the morning. And like I said, it's not an absolute thing. It's a thing that it comes easier now for me, I think, but it's something I have to tell myself and remind myself constantly, because I still get beat up from life, and there really is nothing that's going to beat you up more than just life throwing punches, and it's just getting back up again. And I obviously in my story have done that time and time again, literally, but it's so true, and it's so easy to get down. It's so easy to feel beaten up and like you can't go on. And and you have to do it because it's worth it. When you get further on in life, you finally, you realize the worth of it all. And, and I feel like that's come sooner for me, but in the moment, 3 years 2 years of physical therapy, a year with Mike, when I walked out on the field, that wasn't exactly the moment, but that was really a moment that I kind of got a taste of it to say, here's what's out there. And I feel pretty blessed that it came at that point rather than 10 years. And so I hope people understand that and get that too. So
here's where I read a book. Danny Bader chimed in on Facebook. Danny, thanks for chiming in. Brock, if you get a chance to read his book, I Met Jesus for a Miller Lite. It is a brilliant book. It really is. It's brilliant. And one of the things I got from that is that there's a difference between hope and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you started off hoping and having faith. And then at some point in time, you transitioned into trust. You trusted that God was going to deliver, that you were going to be okay, and that whatever life brought your way, that God had you, and that you didn't really have to worry about that anymore. And if you showed up every day and did your part, that God had your back. And to me, that's what your story is to me. And every person has their own interpretation of another person's life. My interpretation of your life is that you took one of the worst circumstances that you could ever imagine. If you drew it up and did a movie about it, that's the one they would pick. And you said, I'm going to show up every day, put in the work, and trust that God has my back. And what's come from that is a miracle. And some people think miracles are wine to water, healing of Lazarus, whatever they believe a miracle is. To me, a miracle is simply taking something that no one believed that could happen. And whether it's through time, effort, focus, hard work, it happens. That's the miracle. The miracle of it wasn't possible and it became possible. And you are a walking miracle, man. And I'm blessed to be your friend, blessed to know your story, blessed every time I hear you speak. And I am so thankful that you were able to come and do this podcast today during the holiday season, during the week before the worst day of your life. And for that, I'm thankful. Now, where can people who want to hear you speak, who want to hire you to speak, who want to bring you out to deliver your message and walk across the stage, how can they find you?
The easy way, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter. My Twitter and my Instagram are both my name, Brock Mueller, and brockmueller.com. But I am, I've been really busy doing that, but it's something I have a passion for and something I love to do. In speaking, I have a full-time job that I do with a family business, and but like I said, I always love and have a passion for that, and I've traveled all over to do it, and I hope to continue to do that, just for the simple fact that there's just no reward like it in the world to be able to, even if you just meet with one person and they share with you something they struggle with and say, hey, I'm gonna fight this thing harder and I'm going to push through that. That's a powerful, powerful thing. And so I really appreciate the time, Matt, and having me on. And I never downplay that with people. Even the max out thing, like you mentioned earlier, it really was one of those things that it triggered something. I don't know if it was 10% of my recovery or 2% or 1%, but it triggered something. And all along the way, I think there's been so many little miracles. And again, we overlook those things. And I think a big part of that, you have hope, and then you have when you start trusting in God with those things, and it's hard, and it does take time, and it takes a lot of effort to just to trust. It's not just, okay, I'm trusting you from this point on. It's a constant thing, but you start to see those miracles more and more, and I felt that in my own life. And like I said, even though it's throwing punches, I have a different perspective, and I feel like I get to see those things. And I don't think us connecting, us having a circumstance where right before Christmas I do this, I don't think those things are coincidences at all, and who knows what comes of it. But it's amazing, I think, in the way that God has impacted my life and allowed me to reflect Him and impact other people.
Well, make sure that you keep your schedule open sometime in April, May timeframe, because I'm going to be bringing you out to Royersford, PA, to be part of my Night of Inspiration.
Absolutely.
So I will. I'll be in touch with that. But I just wanted, again, everybody, if you get nothing from this podcast specifically, but the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast, is that my goal is to share with you people who truly have lived their dash, who are overcoming circumstances that most people would not, who are living lives that are fulfilling the lives of others with their gifts. That's what I'm trying to share here. And I have yet to have a guest in the first 5 that have impacted more people on a direct basis than Brock Mueller. And his passion for helping others resonates. And I'm so thankful for everything that you're doing for people who right now only have hope and will someday have trust that the work that they're putting in every day and showing up is going to actually pay off. Even if it's only to pay off in a way that maybe that hasn't been revealed yet to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's a beautiful message. So thank you, Brock. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Once again, this was another episode of the 2 Dates and a Dash podcast. I'm your host, Matt Cubbler, and my special guest today was Brock Mueller. God bless, brother. And for God's sakes, everybody, be kind to one another.